there, my name is Caitlin Bandy and this is my channel BandysBooks. Today we're in the kitchen because we are back with another recipe and review. Today we'll be talking about Book of Night by Holley Black and talking about Pancit, specifically Pancit Bihon. So the Book of Night by Holley Black was very hyped coming out this year. It is Holley Black's first attempt at writing adult fiction. She's really well known and well respected in terms of young adult fiction. I actually hadn't really read any of her writing before, so I wasn't familiar with her as an author, and I saw that this was an option for Book of the Month and I decided to go ahead and pick it up. What follows is kind of a spooky, mysterious sort of a story about a character named Charlie Hall, who is a glow mist. There is a world in which shadows have some sort of autonomy. They basically can split from their human and become like an autonomous person, or they can interact with their human. Charlie is kind of living a sketchy life. She's made some bad decisions, got tied up with the wrong crowd, broken a lot of rules, and is just generally kind of on the downside of luck. And she's hoping to turn this around. She gets involved in a bit of a mystery regarding this book called the Book of Night. She ends up in a situation where she's going to try to steal it, and things just go awry from there. The concept for it for me was super interesting, and I felt really intrigued. I love like the idea of like shadow magic and person who wants to be a decent person but's got kind of turned around in their luck. So I love a redemption arc. I love the concept of this shadow magic and this glow mist setup. I thought this would be a really interesting story, so I went ahead and got into it. And I did really love that in this book, Holley Black mentions food many times. So for me, it's always super important when authors are writing books and trying to ground us in the world that like the characters eat. I can't read an 800-page book without a character ever eating. Like, what are they, not human, you know? So it makes my heart happy whenever authors include little details about food. And so that was a big plus for me in here. And specifically, there was a scene in here that really made me happy because it was about a chef and one of my favorite dishes. Let me read it to you so that this whole recipe is gonna make sense. Okay. A bunch of people are at my house tonight, Barb told her, throwing the car into reverse. Her thick black hair was pulled into an olive-covered headscarf, and her cook's jacket hung open over a singlet. I thought about saying something earlier, but I figured it'd be easier to kidnap you. Several times a month, usually on the weekends, Barb and her girlfriends, Amy, played host to a rotating crew of restaurant workers and other people with shifts that finished after midnight. Barb would make a giant pot of pancit with the recipe her grandmother handed down to her mother back in the Philippines, or defrost arroz caldo, and everyone else would either bring something, mostly liquor, or make something, often experimental. Charlie used to show up regularly back when she and Barb worked together, but then there'd been a con in Worcester, then the even weirder thing in Albany, and then she'd been shot. By the time she'd met Vince, her attendance had grown spotty. So I was very excited because Barb, who is just a minor character, she shows up briefly, is a professional cook, which I'm a chef for a living, and so it makes my heart happy whenever somebody includes a cook and represents them well. I loved the concept of all these cooks getting together like at midnight, 1 a.m, and you know, just shooting the shit basically over a pot of pancit, drinking and like enjoying each other's company. That's very realistic to the culinary world. I had many late night meals, 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, getting off of a 16-hour day, getting Philly cheesesteaks or sushi or like whatever at 1 or 2 in the morning. I'm here in Vegas, so you know it's a little easier to accommodate that, but definitely in cities where there's not like 24-hour food, I think that idea of like one person cooking at their house and a lot of people, you know, getting around together and bringing beer or liquor and hanging out is great. So what we're gonna do today is just my own version of it. If you cook pancit at home, or if you have, you know, a friend that cooks it a specific way, like I totally understand. This is one of those things, again, there's many variations. Like the Philippines is such a huge and diverse country. There's, you know, a whole bunch of different types of styles. So I totally understand if you watch this video and you watch this recipe and you're like, well, that's not how I do it, or that's not how my friend does it. I got you. This is just how I do it, and this is the way that I enjoy it. For this recipe, we just need a handful of ingredients. First of all, the most important part, we're gonna need rice noodles. So this is what they look like. They're these very thin, curly looking noodles. And we'll say rice stick or bihon. That's how you know you're getting the right one. And obviously, like here on the front, there's a nice picture of Pancit. Today I'm doing mine with some chicken, and I have some chorizo from Cebu, and so I figured I would use that up in this recipe. We have some chicken stock, some cabbage, celery. Celery is not necessarily the most traditional thing. I will say that typically I don't see that occur in this recipe very often. That's a personal preference of mine, and I had some celery that I needed to use up. Carrots and onions, some garlic, oyster sauce, soy sauce, and some oil to cook with. In terms of equipment, obviously you'll need a cutting board and a knife for yourself at home. I've already prepped up my vegetables for this to make it a nice, easy cooking video. And then you'll need a pan or a wok of some sort to cook your dish in. You want to have something that has a little bit of depth because you do need to soak the noodles in the broth to let them kind of cook down. So just make sure it's not a super shallow pan. So we're gonna start by getting our pan nice and smoking hot. We've got a little bit of cooking oil, and we're just gonna sear off our chicken. You wanna hear that nice sizzle when you put everything in. And I did season our chicken with salt and pepper just to give it a little bit of flavor. Now that our chicken is cooked, we're going to add in our chorizo and let that cook as well. And I just want to say too, like, if you did a roasted chicken or something like that, you could definitely shred down the chicken, or you could simmer some chicken thighs and shred those down if you prefer. I just didn't feel like cooking a whole entire chicken today, so I'm using some breast meat, but probably the more like traditional option would be to shred down chicken. So we're just gonna cook our chicken with our sausage for a couple minutes, get it a little bit of color, a little bit of flavor going, and then we're gonna start frying off our vegetables. While I wait for a minute for this to cook, I wanted to talk about the main character, Charlie, in the book. So I liked Charlie. She was interesting. Like I said, she kind of has a redemption arc going on, or at least we think it's going to be a redemption arc. She's made a bunch of bad decisions. She has kind of a fraught relationship with her mom. She's only really close with her sister. She's dating a guy that for the first time seems to be like a nice guy, but she has a history of dating guys that are not necessarily the best for her. And she has a habit of putting herself in situations that are not the best for her as well. So it's kind of nice to see her at the beginning of the book kind of coming on the upswing of some of these bad decisions. And she's very dedicated to trying to make the right choices. But you can see that she's just one of those people where trouble kind of just finds her. And I thought that all felt very natural. I thought that her life as a bartender and, you know, trying to be on the straight and narrow seemed pretty authentic. I even found her pretty believable as like a thief and a gloamist and like a shady kind of a person. I also found her sister to be pretty believable. Her sister Posey is like her best friend in the story. They're very close. Posey is somebody who is dying to have a shadow and dying to be a gloamist and is not unfortunately blessed with that skill. She even splits her tongue at one point in the story by like tying her tongue ring to a doorknob and slamming it to like rip her tongue in half, because there's something about like you learning to use both sides of your brain to control different muscles and things, basically to be ambidextrous, that makes you, I guess, better positioned to be a gloamist. And so I found her to be really interesting because the whole time she really wants what Charlie has, and Charlie doesn't want to be what she is anymore. She wants to like give that up and move on. So that's kind of interesting how each of them kind of takes for granted the power that they have, or the position that they're in. And then we have Charlie's boyfriend, Vince, who seems like a pretty decent guy. Like in the beginning of the story, we get to know him. He's paying the bills. He's cooking for her. He seems pretty thoughtful. But we find out pretty quickly that unfortunately Charlie's luck with men is kind of going to continue, and he's not really who we expect. However, that's kind of different than what we might be led to think initially, and his story in particular is very interesting. I found all of those characters to be likable enough and interesting enough. Just maybe at points I think that they felt a little flat, not because they were flat as characters, but because the story for me was a little bit slow and a little bit dull. So that's a whole nother story. Right now we're going to focus back on our vegetables for our pancit. So we're going to add in our onions, our carrots, and celery, and we're going to start letting those cook down. Those are gonna cook for a couple minutes, just until they barely get tender. And then we're gonna add some garlic, and we'll go from there. So our vegetables are just barely starting to get tender. You don't wanna overcook them too much. And so we're gonna add in a little bit of garlic. And we're just gonna cook this down until it's fragrant. So about a minute of total cook time on that garlic there. We're gonna remove our veggies and meat to the side on a plate. And then we're gonna start cooking our broth and cooking down our noodles. So we're gonna add in some broth, a couple tablespoons of soy sauce, and a little bit of oyster sauce. Just a tiny, tiny bit of the oyster sauce. That's like not gonna be the dominant flavor here. And we're gonna bring that all up to a boil. I'm gonna crack a little bit of pepper in there as well. Once this comes up to a boil, we're gonna add our noodles and cook them down. Now that's a really quick process. It's just gonna take a couple minutes for these noodles to get soft. And then we'll toss our cabbage in so it has a minute to cook. We'll stir in the meat and veggies that we removed from the pan earlier. And then we'll get to try our dish. So while we're waiting for our broth to come up to a boil, just briefly, let's talk about the plot of Book of Night. I felt like going into this, there were so many things I was gonna love about this book. As I've mentioned, there's a strong redemption arc. There's some characters that are morally gray, potentially even bad guys in hiding. There's an interesting concept for the type of magic and the magic structure. But for reasons unknown to me, this book just kind of fell flat. And I've been seeing that critique of it a lot lately. Like at first I thought maybe it was just me that I was missing something. But as I was like looking at other videos of people reading this and reading reviews and stuff, kind of seems like that's a pretty common criticism. The pacing of this story is very slow. And the action points, I don't know what it is, but there just isn't like a feeling of urgency. It's like, I never really feel like the character is in actual danger, if that makes sense. Like, I know that there's dangerous things happening, but it just doesn't feel convincing enough to make me like, oh my gosh, is she gonna make it? Is she not gonna make it? It lacked some sort of intensity that would have made this a better read, in my opinion. It isn't terrible. I don't wanna like tear this down and make it sound like it's the worst book ever, because it certainly is not. And my feeling is that this is kind of a setup for a series. Like, I feel like we got introduced to Charlie. There was like an introduction to Vince and Posey, kind of a small conflict that gets resolved relatively easy, but that might set up conflicts going forward or things that are gonna happen going forward. So maybe if it's just the start to a series, the series will pick up in intensity and speed. But definitely, if you're gonna give this a try, just be prepared for it to be a slower read. It's not horrible, it's just not like edge of your seat, which is kind of more what I was expecting. Overall, for me, it was probably somewhere like around a 3-star read, and I was a little disappointed by that. I was hoping that this was gonna be like knock your socks off. With the way that I hear people talk about Holley Black and some of her YA series, I thought that hopefully this was gonna be a really successful debut. For me, it was just so-so. I would consider checking out one of her other books in the future. Like, I'm not so put off that I wouldn't ever read her again. But certainly, I think I would be a little more choosy, I guess, about what I would read and kind of maybe try something that's like highly recommended. That's about all I have to say about the book in particular. I will say that the cover is a stunner. Actually, there's multiple versions that I've seen, special editions. The Book of the Month edition is really pretty, but I've seen some other editions that are just as gorgeous as well. So I will give props to the cover design. And overall, like I said, it is a really creative concept, and the characters are interesting enough. Just kind of needed a little more meat to fill it out. So we're almost done with this. Our liquid is coming up to a boil, so let's go ahead and transition back to the pan, and I'll show you how to finish this. Now that our liquid is boiling, we're gonna go ahead and start cooking down our noodles. I am going to separate them kind of into sheets, so you'll see like it'll be like one big block, and they kind of separate into sheets. And I usually just kind of let them soak down a little bit before I like throw the whole thing in, because as you can see, they get a little stiff. So if you try to like just set the whole thing in, it doesn't work as well. So let me just put the rest in there. So we're gonna let those soften up, and they will pretty quickly absorb most of that liquid. So don't stress. So you can see, I mean, they're softening up pretty quickly in this liquid. And this only really just takes a couple minutes. And I really love that these kind of absorb the color of the broth as well. So they'll go from being white to kind of a opaque color, and then they'll take on a brownish hue because of all the soy and the oyster sauce and whatnot. So as you can see, these are just about there. Just a couple pieces that are a little bit stiff still. So I just kind of move them around and let them kind of break up. Once they've broken up a little and they're like all submerged in the juice, you don't have to, or in the broth, you don't have to move them quite as much. I just like to kind of stir them up in the beginning so that the pieces that are like stuck together kind of break up. So you can see that most of our liquid has been absorbed by the noodles. They've taken on a nice like brownish color. We're gonna just quickly toss in our cabbage and let it cook for just a couple minutes or a couple seconds. Like, it doesn't take very long. And then we're gonna toss in all the cooked meat and veggies that we sauteed prior to the noodles as well. And I should add, if you wanted to make a vegetarian version or a vegan version of this, I've done that for the restaurant that I worked at, or the meal prep company that I work at. We just used veggie stock instead of chicken broth, and then instead of, you know, obviously including meats and things, we just started adding in just extra vegetables. Some that work really well are snap peas, bell peppers. We used kale in one dish. Like, there's a lot that you could do with this, and it comes out really nice. Green beans. So don't be afraid to experiment. You could also make this like pescatarian if you wanted to sub out the chicken and sausage for some shrimp. I think I'm gonna switch to tongs because this is getting a little hard with the spoon. So you could switch it out for shrimp. You could do it with pork instead of chicken. There is like a never-ending combination of things that you can do with this. And that's one of the reasons that I love it, is because it's such a versatile dish. And there's so many ways to do it. And I would encourage you to, if you're like really interested in this, to look into the different styles of pancit as well. This one's just my favorite for like a quick, easy meal because it's not hard to make, and as you can see, it does not take long. So that looks good there. I'm gonna go ahead and toss those veggies and meat back in, and then we're gonna finish this up. And we are gonna season this with a little bit of pepper. I don't typically add salt because, in my opinion, with the soy sauce and the oyster sauce, it doesn't really need it. But of course, if you feel that it needs that adjustment at home, do so. No harm. Just probably test it before you do. So there we are. I am so excited to dig into these. It's almost 9 o'clock at night and I'm starving. So I am ready to plate this up and have dinner. Oh yeah. This looks so good. I'm so excited. My mouth is literally watering as I plate this right now. Okay. So again, this recipe was inspired by Book of Night by Holley Black. It was a so-so read for me, but it doesn't mean it'll be a so-so read for you. What's not so-so for me is pancit. I'm so excited about dinner tonight. This is one of my all-time favorite foods. And like I mentioned in the beginning of the video, there's so much nostalgia for me for many reasons. So I hope that if you haven't had pancit before, you'll give this a try at home. Super easy and approachable to make. And I'm sure you're gonna fall in love with it too. What's not to like? Noodles, veggies, a couple different types of meat, like that chorizo really hits in here too. One thing, so you could use Chinese sausage, but the chorizo that I got at the Filipino market here locally, and it's specifically from Cebu. If you're not familiar with the Philippines, Cebu is a really big city and a big island. I got to spend some time there, and let me tell you, the pork that I ate in Cebu was some of the best I've had in the world. Been to 25 countries, so I say that having tried pork in a lot of different countries. Chicharrones, like the chorizo, the lechon, incredible. So when I saw these little chorizos from Cebu, I was super, super excited about it and made sure to grab them. But if they're not available, that's okay. I understand that not everybody has everything close by. And then I also wanted to make one other note that typically, like after your pancit's cooked, you might squeeze some calamansi juice over the top of it. Calamansi is like a little tiny citrus fruit that comes from the Philippines. Unfortunately, my market was out of calamansi when I went to pick up the sausage, which was really sad for me. If you also don't have calamansi available, a little squeeze of lemon won't hurt, but it is a little bit different. I just want to make that note. So I hope that you'll give this a try. Let me know in the comments below what your comfort food is. Like, what's the thing that reminds you of childhood? Like when you're missing home, feeling like you just need a pick-me-up or a hug from someone, what dish do you crave in that moment? And hit the thumbs up button if you liked the video. And of course, if you're not already subscribed, you know what to do. Hit the subscribe button down below so you never miss a video. We have lots of recipe and reviews in the future if you're a foodie and a book lover like me. Thanks for joining. Again, I'm Caitlin Bandy. This is my channel, BandysBooks. Have a good night.
That Cebu sausage or chorizo, it's super good. Very, very good.
It hits, right?
Very flavory. It has a very nice sweet flavor on it, and the pork, it's very, very good there. Oh yeah.
You like it?
Lovely.
There you have it, boyfriend approved. We're gonna finish our dinner because we're both starving at this time. Thanks for joining. Bye.